Good afternoon, and you're all very welcome to ODI. My name is Edward Hedger. I am the Director for Finance and Economic Development here at ODI, the Overseas Development Institute. And I'm delighted to welcome you all to this event this afternoon. Japan and the UK, a new development cooperation policy post-2015, addressing diversified challenges and enhanced partnership. The shorthand is we're here to hear about the new Japanese Development Cooperation Charter, which is, I think, a really important document setting out a vision, a strategy, a plan for Japanese cooperation, development cooperation over the coming years, but also to explore that in a comparative perspective. There's been a lot of discussion of change. At the moment, we are anticipating several summits coming up, the Financing for Development Conference in Addis next week, no least, UN General Assembly, the SDGs. So it's a momentous year, but it's also one in which many governments, many traditional development agencies and donors are reviewing and rethinking the way they provide development cooperation, looking at their strategic intent, their comparative advantage. So this is, I think, a really interesting, exciting opportunity to hear directly from the government of Japan and some renowned academics on the latest thinking, but also to try and explore that in the context of perhaps UK as well, since ODI is based here. We have some distinguished speakers, Mr. Ken Okaniwa, who is Deputy Director General of the International Cooperation Bureau at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs in Japan. He will lead off with a presentation setting out some thinking and some principles of the Charter. And then two eminent discussants. On my left, Professor Izumi Ono, who's a professor at the National Graduate Institute of Policy Studies in Japan, who are also, I'm pleased to say, a long-standing collaborator with ODI, yes. So you're very, very welcome back as well. And Professor Kenneth King from School of Social Science, Social and Political Science at the University of Edinburgh. And we also will have an additional intervention from Mazumi Owa, who is an assistant professor at Nagawa College as well, a few other reflections. Unfortunately, we don't have a speaker from DFID with us today. We were hoping to do that, but there was a challenge around scheduling. However, we're going to turn that to our advantage by knowing that many of you in the room are very familiar with UK development cooperation and policy issues as well. So we'll probably try and take a few reflections and a few comparative perspectives from around the room. We have best part of 90 minutes. We are on the record. We're live streamed. We'll take some questions, I hope, over the internet. The way we'll run is I'll ask Mr. Okaniwa to open with a presentation for about 15 minutes. There's been a lot of discussion about how precise the timings will be, but we're going to try and keep to blocks of 15 minutes per speaker. And then our two discussants, Professor Ono and Professor King. And then we will leave a good 30, 40 minutes for some questions and discussions and hope to get a good discussion going. So, Mr. Okaniwa, you're extremely welcome at ODI. Please, over to you.
Thank you, Mr. Hedger. My name is Okaniwa, Ken Okaniwa from Ministry of Foreign Affairs. I will today first give you a presentation on the new Development Cooperation Charter. This is a document adopted by the Cabinet in February this year. We usually revise this document every 10, 12 years, and this is a document which guides ODA policy, the way we use our ODA budget. We have had extensive consultations with the NGOs, the public and the economic circles, as well as members of parliament. And it shows the development or new approaches that we've incorporated over the last 12 years. So we use this document to show our taxpayers and our donor community and our partners in the developing countries what is our approach towards development and what kind of assistance we are able to provide. So the document, the real document, is a 16 or 70 page document, and I will not explain word by word, but basically, if you look at this document, you will know what sort of approach we have and what sort of activities we support. And but I have short time today, so I'll just try to focus on some of the new elements and what led us to incorporate some new elements, and also some of the things which will not change. Page 1 of the PowerPoint. We try to take account of this changing situation in the development world. And of course, the developing world has become much more diverse. There are more middle-income countries now than before. There are emerging countries, and there are developing countries which now provide their own assistance. And the funding for developing countries have become much more biased towards private funds. I think the role of ODA, therefore, we think should be to work as a catalyst to mobilize private funds. And this is a very important point in our development charter. And of course, globalization and issues that are of global nature, such as the Ebola crisis, or cybersecurity issues, or climate change. These are issues which cannot be solved by just few number of countries which are rich, but it has to be dealt with through cooperation between developed and developing countries. So we attach a lot of importance to the partnership between developed and developing countries. Now, if you looked at the second half of page 1 in the PowerPoint, we have the philosophy of Japan's development cooperation. Now, this part, I think, is a part which reflects the consistent nature, things which we will maintain in this cooperation charter. One is that our ODA, or our development cooperation, will be for non-military purposes. However, we do have a new inserted sentence which says that we will provide assistance to military or members of the military if it is for non-military development purposes. We will, of course, make sure that it will be scrutinized so that the assistance will not be diverted to other uses, and that there will be monitoring after the assistance is done. One example of this assistance is, this kind of assistance is our assistance to a military hospital in Senegal, and we provided equipment for the maternal ward of the hospital, which was used by mothers in the region. And there are only 3 examples of such assistance which was provided to the military or military or members of the military during the last 10 years. Second point, which will not change, is our approach on human security. I think that you are familiar with human security, but we will continue to pursue human security in our aid programs. And third is collaboration based on equal partnership. A new element that is included in this charter is quality growth. We have always attached importance to promoting growth, but in this charter we are pursuing quality growth, which includes the elements of inclusiveness in the sense that we will not leave anyone from the development, and sustainability, which is sustainable in environmental terms, and also resilience, resilience against natural disasters and economic shocks. Now, in order to promote quality growth, we attach particular importance to quality infrastructure. In May of this year, Prime Minister Abe announced the Quality Infrastructure Partnership in Asia, which consists of $110 billion of assistance for infrastructure in Asia. We would like to see infrastructure in developing countries which have a lower life cycle cost, and which are resilient against natural disasters, and which are beneficial for the people concerned, as well as better maintained and operated. And we are working with international organizations like the World Bank to promote the element of quality growth, because it is ultimately the developing countries who shoulder the cost of developing their own infrastructure, and we think that we should assist in promoting quality infrastructure for their development. Another point that is new is that we are promoting universal values and peaceful and secure society. We have supported peace-building activities or humanitarian activities in developing countries. We have some new, areas where we incorporated in this document, and that is cyber security, maritime security, and space. We think that cyber security is important for developing countries as well, because they are useful for development. And of course, cyber attacks are of global nature. We cannot just prevent cyber attacks by just protecting your own country. We have cooperation with ASEAN in this regard. On space, we utilize our satellite information to support weather forecasting or adaptation efforts and other efforts to, monitor the planet for development. And also on maritime, we support countries in the ASEAN and also countries such as Djibouti or Sri Lanka to strengthen their capability to, protect safety in the seas. Because there are illegal activities such as smuggling, terrorists, and illegal fishing, which must be prevented for development. We also included a support to countries which have graduated from a dark list, because countries such as small island states still are vulnerable to climate change. They need assistance, technical assistance, and we don't think that we should just rule out assistance just because they graduated from the threshold under the dark list. Last point, it's not the last point. Another point is the middle income trap. We want to continue to support the middle income countries. They now account for 75% of the poor people in developing countries. We think that there is a need to address various diverse needs, such as raising the skills base or dealing with the governance and the policy issues that middle-income countries face. And we think that we should also, along with the LDCs and the low-income countries, we need to address the development needs of the middle-income countries. Last point, because my time is running out, is that we emphasize partnership with the private sector. I'm not going into details on the public-private partnerships, but we do think that Japan has, one of the comparative advantages of Japan is that companies have technologies which benefit development in developing countries. For example, a company called Kagome, which produces tomato juice and tomato paste, they are working with JICA to promote production of tomato and tomato sauce in, I think, Senegal, which hopefully will help the farmers produce tomato and also to help them eventually to go on, for the country to go into sort of the food industries. And we also want to work with Japanese local governments, which have expertise in water management and environment, waste management, and other activities in Japan, they have the know-how to support developing countries address urban problems. And we also have a new scheme which was introduced about 8 years ago, Science and Technology Partnership for Sustainable Development. This we fund joint research projects between Japanese and also researchers from the developing countries, and these are on issues such as climate change or energy or food production and adaptation. And I think technology is a very important element of Japanese assistance today, because developing countries can benefit from the most advanced technologies, and they don't need to wait until they become developed. And I think Japan has a comparative advantage in that as well. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. And also for keeping so precisely to time as well. It makes my job extremely easy. Well, there's a lot of rich material in there. I dare say that many people in the room will be quite familiar with some aspects of the New Development Charter, and of course very familiar historically with cooperation, but a few themes that I hope will sort of come out from the discussion, including the sort of the emphasis on global public goods, a very strong beyond aid narrative, and some discussion about private sector engagement. So just plant those as themes that people might want to start thinking about, anticipating questions and interventions. Let me, though, turn first to Professor, oh no? Oh no, we'll go first. Professor King. Yes. Oh no, in fact. Just for the joke. Professor King next. Sorry, my chivalry is getting the better of me. And ask you to offer a few reflections in response. And I think we have some slides. Also, Mr. Okinawa's presentation is the 4 slides on your seat if anyone didn't see them. Anyway, please.
This is on now, is it? Not yet.
No, it's on.
It's on. You can hear all right. Well, it's very nice to be here as the guest of the Prime Minister's office in Japan, which has organized this event, and to meet the other Ken here from the MOFA, and also friends in the room who I see from earlier days, including people who know a great deal more about Japan than I, like Kweiko Ampia, who is hiding behind there. It's my wife and I were in Nagoya University for 4 months at the invitation of that university, and during that time we got to know, we sort of updated ourselves on what Japan is doing in aid from November until March. So this event came right in the middle of it. And when one was in JICA, one heard 1 or 2 quite senior people using this, to me, quite interesting word, Japaneseness. And I thought we would investigate the charter for what light it sheds on Japaneseness. And let me have a look at that now. But I'll try, in going through it, to just glance at 1 or 2 of the comparative dimensions, as Diffid is not here. That's a very good read, you know, the UK's White Paper on International Development. Very well written, very powerfully written, and it sort of moves Britain away from a narrow British agenda to a global agenda. It captures the importance of the predecessors of the MDGs, the International Development Targets. Also, China's African policy, I'll drop a hint on from time to time, because that too is interesting. It doesn't pay much attention to the MDGs. China's got a very different agenda. But when we come to look at Japan and this charter in particular, again, not very much reference to the MDGs. Earlier charters did do that. So we'll look at a few of these things. We've only got 15 minutes. When I first did this, I had an hour to do this, so you'll be glad, Ed, to know that I'm not going to go through all these. But we will look at some of the distinctive dimensions of Japan's charter and Japan's aid through the lens of this document, which is also an important read, and to read it narrowly and carefully, because Actually, the person who translated it into English is on my left-hand side. His English is very good. So there is some reference back to Japan's particularity in being the first country to become modern. Now, they do refer to that here, but they also, you can compare with China, where the language of China's aid is very different. There's a much more emphasis on mutuality. This word "mutual" is used all the time in Chinese aid discussions. In UK, much less. UK is much more concerned about its global role, and it doesn't talk the language of people-to-people cooperation at all. History is very important to Japan. You can't read even this charter without being aware that there's a long history, and as Okaniwa said, there are lots that is the same in this, that goes right back to earlier charters. And Japan is always referring back to what it learned from the war, always looking at what it can learn from history, using these kind of key words. Look at them: resilient, sustainable, inclusive. It's just bringing out a book. It may be out by now. We can hear from our Japanese colleagues. 60 years of foreign aid. Don't forget, it was the top donor for the whole decade in the 1980s to 1990s. And so it's a very different story when you get to China. China doesn't talk about the replicability of its own modernization. It doesn't preach that in at all the same way. So there are interesting things to notice there. Britain, by contrast, does regard itself as having a key role. G8, Commonwealth, Europe, still, okay? We're still in there in Europe. And I hope we will stay there. Now, one of the things that is unusual in this paper that you've got in front of you, the 17-page one, I mean, is that for the first time that I've come across, Japan uses SP, soft power, and it refers to the Japanese language. Japanese language is tricky stuff for Japan to talk about because of the 1930s and its own imperial parallel to what we were doing in Europe, parallel, not any different from what we had been doing. But look at what it's done in soft power. Quite a small number of institutes, only 22 around the world, and they were set up, Ken was telling me, really more to persuade US and Europe that we were not a threat. Interesting, the origins of the 1970s. A handful of Japan centers in East Asia, 10 proposed TICAD centers in Africa with a business orientation, and some information and cultural centers. But compare that with what the other major powers who are involved in cultural cooperation are doing. If you're concerned with soft power and Japanese language, is what they're doing enough? They've just for the first time in 40 years made a grant to a US university. First time in 40 years to promote Japanese studies. Here's the comparator. It's quite an interesting slide, I think. Just look at the numbers there. Remember, 22 Japan foundations, only one of them in Africa, all clustered in Europe, North America, and East Asia, one in China. British Council, 200. Goethe, Confucius Institutes, Japan's neighbor, very much a proponent of soft power, the neighbor. 470 Confucius Institutes in the world, and 700 Confucius classrooms. These are to be found in universities like ours in Edinburgh, like my old university in Nairobi. So they're a very powerful. I don't know whether that is in any way connected to finding soft power in this document, but it's at least a question for the audience to consider. So there's the numbers at the bottom, if you can see it. What else? The X factor. This is very important in Japan's cooperation. the importance of Japanese people doing development. This is much less so the case in Britain, I would say. Look at the sheer number of experts, and those are only a handful of those that are sent from Japan. The importance of the field-oriented approach, sharing technology, sharing the values that Ken was talking about. And look what the Japan centers claim, that Japanese expertise is now available worldwide. Well, hold it, only 10 centers. So there's a paradox in a way, because Japan believes very much itself, looking at its own history, on Western knowledge, Japanese spirit, wakon yosai, for you who speak a bit of Japanese, more than I do. But what does that mean when you have Japanese experts themselves in Kenya? Is it then Japanese knowledge, Kenyan spirit? I mean, let's think about that. What's the transfer of that expert knowledge mean when you go to Africa or Asia? This is the claim of Japan, the largest training program in the world. It's partly true. China's got the next, or in fact, Germany's the largest, followed by India, China, and Japan. Those are the 4 big training programs in the world. Not Britain, seeing we're asked to think about Britain, not Britain. We were interested in Britain until the end of interested in training until the end of the Cold War, and then our training numbers reduced dramatically, the numbers that came to centres all around the UK. There's thousands coming to Japan. Look at the numbers of participants coming to Japan. There are Japan centres, JICA centres all over the Japanese mainland. Unique role for those. And they train in a whole series of fields that you should look at, the sheer scale of this. I already referred to that paradox of Japanese knowledge, and what about the spirit of those that you're working with? Universal values, Okaniwa-san has already mentioned those, but pick out some of those key words. Interesting, aren't they? The emphasis on terms like agile, proactive, resilient, the sense that Japan can move faster than perhaps some people think that they can move. That's an old story, but is there a China factor here as well? Because China moves so fast in Africa, and Japan is much, much more cautious. So let's think about that. There are other kinds of values that are equally important. China talks the language of friendship all the time in those foreign aid papers. Friendship, mutuality. UK and Japan don't. You can't find the word friendship in any British white paper in the last, since 1978. It's not there, 1997, sorry. Occupational culture, very, very important. It's not pushed very hard here. You won't find the famous Kaizen notion that Ono Sensei knows so much about mentioned in this paper, and yet it's such a key value. So when you're looking for uniqueness in Japan's approach, this is a key issue. It's worth asking the question as you read this paper, and all I'm trying to do is encourage you to read this carefully yourselves, critically. Is it self-help is very important. It's very important to Japan. The Scottish author Samuel Smiles' book sold in hundreds of thousands of copies in the 19th century, just after the Meiji Restoration, because they could see that this idea about self-help was critical to their own development. Okay. So do think about whether, as you read this, there's not much about Japanese self-help. It's more about you. I've got to illustrate self-help in Kenya, Zimbabwe, wherever we are working. I think it's actually implicit in here, but Japan certainly says yes to demand-led development. But notice in this paper, the word proactive is much more frequently used. So they're ready not just to wait, but to move. As Okaniwa-san said, private sector is very much the new girl in the block, on the block here. It's mentioned a lot of the time, as was said by him. It's seen as the powerful engine for economic growth. There are opportunities for Japanese private companies. This is a story that's running through the agency world. You can see it in Netherlands. You can see it. Look at the bottom. In this building, maybe in this room, on Monday, Tuesday this week, the Secretary of State for DFID, for DFID's UK's DFID, said the following: at DFID, our relationship with business has never been closer. 3 days ago. So Britain is very much on the same hymn sheet. So if we're looking for cooperation in relation to the private sector. We've heard about infrastructure. That's important in both these countries, not so much in the case of... but what Ken talked about is quality growth linked to poverty reduction. Poverty reduction is all over UK's white papers still. But it's interesting that in China's white papers, you don't find the word poor. Poor is a word that's frequently used by G8 people. It's the purpose of aid, growth for poverty reduction. China doesn't use the word poor in its white papers, in its Africa policy. That's actually quite nice for many African leaders and presidents, not always to be regarded as the poorest country in the world. Look at the DFID website, Ethiopia, one of the poorest countries. First line. Not the best way to say hi, the poorest country in the world. Why are we having the financing for development meeting in Addis, I wonder, if it's the poorest country in the world? It's one of the most dynamic countries in Africa, as a matter of fact. So look, a quick, in ending, I've written a long paper on this, by the way, so any of you who are interested in this story, and particularly I, who am an education person, I have a lot to say about education, but that's all I'm saying in this short presentation, that Japan pays more attention to HRD and to universities than to the kind of basic education in this paper. Fascinating book, that second item there. But look also at UK's education position paper. There it talks about Britain's unique role, particularly in respect of research on education. Unfortunately, there's far too much talk in DFID about value for money. That is the Bible. That is the Bible, value for money. I think it's a sad reflection on what development aid is for, that it's the obsession with measurement and with analysis. So, I've said in ending already. In ending, let me ask you to consider whether aid with a Japanese face is what we're really looking at in this document. I think probably yes. Japan is essential to Japan's aid. Look at the any JICA annual report. The introduction by Tanaka, the president, will say, it's about people to people. It's about Japanese people in Africa, in Kenya, in the rice field. It's about... read that. It's a really interesting report. 2014 JICA annual report. There's a Japanese on every page. That's an exaggeration. But Japan is doing Japanese aid. Britain's white papers have no wazungus, no white people, no Brits to be seen. So it's a different story. China doesn't do annual reports, so we don't know what they would look like. If you want to do some follow-ups, write me and get the full paper. And we have a chance to talk to each other not only in the Q&A, but also afterwards over a snack. Thank you very much. Absolutely.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you for some very thoughtful comments, and we'll hear a reaction also from Mr. Okaniwa in a minute, but also to invite us to take a very close reading of this document, which is, for what it reveals as much as what it says, which I think is interesting. So we'll come back to that theme. Let me now, a second time, turn over to Professor Ono. This time, really, for your presentation, and again, if you could offer some reflections again on this Japanese and UK perspectives.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much. It is my great honor to speak here together with the excellent the guests and friends here. Because I'm the third speaker, so I just wanted to share my thought of the way forward, particularly UK and Japan in the new era of development cooperation. Okay. And this is a list of the topics which I want to discuss, but because of time limitation, maybe I cannot go through every slide. I have to skip some of them. But let me just start saying briefly about my comments of the Japanese Development Cooperation Charter. This is an evolution of Japanese ODA policy. As you can see, over the last 60 years, we have had different phases of the Japanese development cooperation like this. And then blue is the first ODA charter, and then second one, and then red is the current ODA development cooperation charter. Okay. So as you see from this, the first ODA charter, which was made in 1992, was when Japan became a top donor. So the major objective of that charter was to articulate clearly the Japanese philosophy of international contribution as a top donor, what kind of contribution we want to make. Because after a series of expansion of ODA budget, we became top donor, but many people say that, well, Japan is just disbursing money. So we wanted to kind of clarify, well, we are working on a self-help effort. We want to alleviate poverty for international cause. So we wanted to put that agenda very clearly. Then second ODA charter was made in 2003. That was a time we had a very difficult time of the economic kind of situation. And then declining budget associated with that maybe declining popular support to ODA. But that was a time when international community is now starting to appeal a lot for the MDG, PRSP, 0.7%. So it was really important for Japan to think, still we have to work on this cause. And then we have broadened the content to include peace building issues, clearly saying human security issues together. Okay. So, and also we have gone through a lot of series of ODA reform during that time. Then third charter, currently introduced by Mr. Okaniwa, 2015, is that, as you know, the new landscape of international development. We have a SDG era is coming, diverse actors, emerging economies, but still we have a difficult economic situation, although we are trying to make boost of the economy. So we have to sharpen the strategic focus, and then in the globalized world, we have to understand the closer links between development global agenda and domestic agenda. So that is the kind of maybe background for the new development cooperation charter in the domestic aspect. But I will not go into detail because Mr. Okaniwa have already talked about the change and continuity of this charter. Okay. Then let's go to that kind of this slide. So now we are moving to SDG era. Okay. So compared to the MDG era, we have much more broader agenda. Transformative agenda is the center of the kind of issues, including poverty eradication, prosperity, justice, sustainability issues. So we have to also think about not just aid, beyond aid issues. And then we have to work with diverse actors, emerging donors, private sector, as everybody said. So we are living in a one world, so integral approach, universal approach, everybody must be on board. So that is the kind of that new era which we are coming through. Having said that, I want to say, for Japan, a transformative agenda is not necessarily new to us. For the past 60 years, consistently, we have been working on maybe growth agenda, transformative agenda. Okay? And then also linkage between FDI, private sector, and ODA is also maybe special feature of Japanese cooperation. So this is quite different from the maybe sort of traditional Western donors approach. However, we have to think about what is new in SDG era for the Japanese cooperation. This is, I have to say, the much deeper involvement of the business sector in solving global and also local development challenges. I think many people may be familiar with creating the shared value approach, CSV, instead of maybe CSR approach, which also include that inclusiveness, sustainability, resilience, those are important issues. So we have to kind of work on that more in the new era of SDG. In this case, I wanted to talk about that because we are now living in a very much increased complex world, climate change issues, Ebola, infectious diseases, urban management, and disaster issues. So no single actor can resolve all those complicated issues. That's why we have to work together, including private sector, by utilizing their expertise and innovation power. For that reason, from around 2009 or 2010, Japanese government, including METI, and also Ministry of Foreign Affairs, together with JICA and JETRO, they have started to engage more actively the business sector to tackle global and local challenges. So that is inclusive business or based on the pyramid business, which I think you are much more familiar with because you were introducing this approach maybe 10 years ago. In addition, as Mr. Okaniwa said, that the Japanese local government are increasingly engaged in sharing their urban and environmental management experiences together with Japanese SME and NPO. Okay? I will talk about it later. And then, so these are some examples of the inclusive business and BOP business, and Japanese companies are now getting involved increasingly day by day. So business as a core business can build partnership with low-income people as a consumer, a producer, distributor, a retailer with various value chain. Like that, we have Ajinomoto with a big corporate, and they are working right now in Ghana on food and nutrition as a supplement. Yamaha Motors, they are working on the clean water system in Africa or Indonesia. Japanese SME, Nippon Polygon, they are producing water purification materials and food value chain, solar lantern. These are kind of example, but I think more companies are now getting involved on these kind of activities. Okay. Also, local government, together with Japanese business people, NPO, they are increasingly engaged in tackling urban management for environmental issues. Because we have had a lot of difficult time in the high growth era, pollution issues, mega city issues. So I think that the local government, together with NPO, civil society, and then introducing technology of the SME or big company, we have overcame a very difficult kind of pollution issues in some of the cities. As you see, that there are some of the leading the local government, like Yokohama, near Tokyo, which is the bedtown of Tokyo, the mega cities, they went through huge urbanization. And Kita-Kyushu is a southern part of Japanese island, but they used to be a steel industry town. And a lot of pollution took place, but they overcame those issues together with civil service, civil society, and company, and the local government. So they are now compiling those efforts in a kind of knowledge-sharing program basis, and then exchange with Asian countries and other regions, and then they are together to transfer those kind of adaptation to those countries. So green city, sustainable city, those are kind of examples they are working on. So having said that, let me introduce about how UK and Japan can work together, or maybe, the Professor King said that the Secretary of State, Miss Justine Greening, she had a kind of speech a few days ago. As I understand, also she took up very much emphasis on the economic development issue, together with the women's, children's, and the health sectors, etc. So it seems to me that the UK is becoming very closer to Japan, because we feel that in the late 90s and early 2000s, there are big debates between Japan and the UK. Economic growth, vice versa, poverty reduction, budget support, and project aid, loans and grants. And I think these are very unproductive debates. I think both are important. So now I feel UK is maybe becoming closer to Japan, because there have been a wide acceptance of transformative agenda, the doubling budget for economic development by the next few years. And I think also there are many papers talking about economic development, prosperity, infrastructure, high-level prosperity partnership in Africa, whole government approach by using British expertise. So lots of kind of things, initiatives are going on right now. So at the same time, I still feel like there are some very key important differences how maybe UK and Japan approach to the aid and development. This is why we can be a complementary partner. Okay. This table is a very too simple, and I have to admit that there are risk of that exaggeration or oversimplification, but just to illustrate how we can be maybe contrastive. So East is especially in Japan, but maybe our goal is now approaching, no? But approach would be still different. I think UK is very good in setting up a global rule, international financial architectures, and appealing that for the world. That is very much impressive. On the other hand, maybe Japan is on the ground. We are more obsessed with a concrete detail, correctly spoken by the Professor King. So JICA and JICA experts love to go to that field, going to the companies, factory, crop field to think what's going on there. But maybe ask the consultant to work on that. If I am, yeah, okay. So this reflects the way kinds of program we work. In the case of Japan, we have a concrete infrastructure development, industrial human resource development, Tibet, SME, FDI, local company linkages. Those are kind of typical program we work. Maybe I think UK is very good at setting up a kind of matching fund, general budgetary support, PPP, those things. Professor King said that the Kaizen is not included in the ODA charter, latest charter, but I think there are many instruments we have in the industrial human resource development. So maybe this is why we didn't just focus on the Kaizen. One more example concretely. I think now, I think UK is promoting more actively on the infrastructure development, but maybe approach is different between Japan and the UK. Japanese maybe aid really focus on where to build a road, geographical situation, durability, technology to be adapted, and then when we build a road, how to make sure that regional development will take place. So it's more context specific on the ground. And then when UK promote that infrastructure development, I think it's much more finance oriented. I think that's very important. But you will appeal to the infrastructure financing facilities, try to make sure infrastructure can reach to the poor people, etc. And then you will organize international forum. You will also work through international organization, and you will sometimes utilize general budgetary support to prioritize, or you have set up some specific fund or facility for PPP. So these are, I think, very much that are different, but complementary. Okay. Just a few words on then how can we collaborate together, the UK and Japan, based on that kind of complementarity and differences. Okay. I am working for Ethiopia for the last 6 years, so where I see that a lot of interest kind of that mutual interaction taking place on the ground, based on the conventional approach. And then I think UK has a recently active program of private sector development, PEPE, Private Enterprise Development Program in Ethiopia. Their approach is to make sure market function for the poor people to participate in the business. So actual program is to finance microfinance institution or looking at the value chain of the key sectors to eliminate the bottlenecks. So those kind of maybe working through the market to make sure market will function for the poor people. Japan, for myself, together with JICA, have been working to how to improve the government policy making capabilities and implementation capacities through industrial policy dialogue. We have a regular dialogue with the Ethiopian senior the officials, including prime ministers, on the key aspects of industrial development. And we compare some Asian experiences and then show what kind of practice would be most useful for Ethiopia. In parallel, JICA is working on the Kaizen project. That is a kind of factory-based that the productivity improvement on the floor, working together on the bottom-up approach to improve quality improvement. It's a kind of diagnostic of the kind of quality productivity improvement. And JICA expert, together with Ethiopian counterpart, to try to enhance the training trainers, instructors of their capabilities of teaching Kaizen nationwide. Okay. So maybe I will skip this thing. Yeah. This is kind just we wanted to say how that we work on the policy dialogue and Kaizen. And then these are kind of things. And then one more possibility for that the new collaboration in the new area. I think we should think seriously about how we can work on inclusive business area between UK and Japan. Because UK is a pioneer on that area. I think you have started about 10 years ago, 1999, for this kind of business. And especially in Africa, UK has a rich kind of network and also various financing instruments. And you have also very active NGO in working in support the proper activities. So these can be effectively combined with the Japanese potential strengths as a quality leader because as a business sector, manufacturing oriented to produce on the ground. I have had a meeting with the CDC people. It is very much impressed with how they work on Africa by utilizing loan, grant, equity issues. Also, there are recently social impact investment, which is very much important to have a risk taking activity on the social business. And also challenge funds and business innovation facilities. They have a lot of good, maybe local partners. So these networks could be also better combined with maybe Japanese enterprises or companies. So my suggestion is we should have a more information sharing and collaboration between the Japanese and UK inclusive business community should be promoted. Just the last, 3 slides. Okay.
See me writing.
Okay. So the final thought. Okay, I have to say, right now we are at the age of choice. I think I like this terminology based on the ODI working paper. Currently, as you see that we are really changing the landscape. So the role of Asian emerging donors and growth resurgence among, including UK traditional, maybe Western donors. These are, I think, very welcome development for Japan because we feel we have been isolated over the past maybe decades on the international community on the kind of transformative agenda issues. At the same time, these more diverse and increased development actors imply developing countries could have more broader choices to work with for development cooperation. So I think we have to become a partner to be selected, chosen, based on comparative advantages. That's why I feel like Japan should focus on its core competence and continue to contribute to the international development in the post-2015. So I feel now forthcoming era is an era of cooperation, at the same time competition. So we have to be a partner to be selected by the recipient countries. So how can we be strong and attractive? Okay. So one is we can have a core competence, traditional core competence, as a latecomer, which is shared by emerging donors in Asia. So we can work with them together to share this idea and disseminate our thinking to mainstream the global development debate. So these are one thing. And then second thing, as a last week, as a maybe new thinking, that looking at our 60 years of experience of the aid development cooperation, I think we are mature donors already. We are not so young. We are mature donors, so we cannot kind of compete with maybe physical strength. Yeah, so we have to be a mature donor. We have to be a knowledge partner for the partner countries. But we have a wealth of knowledge and technology, including also difficult experience which we overcame. So business sector, local government, CSQ, university, which can work together to share those experiences. Also, we are facing frontier challenges like aging, birth rate declining, which will be happening eventually in other developing countries, particularly in Asia. So whatever the problem we are now tackling should be also useful for them. Also, Japan has had the network already based on the past year's collaboration with Asian countries. So I hope we can bring those partners in providing intellectual aid together, not just Japanese experience, but also bringing their experience, like Thailand, Malaysia, etc. And lastly, for the Japanese business sector's involvement, I think Japan is a very unique business practice. I think Japanese is a very much manufacturing oriented, rather than maybe the real estate or services. So we may be very slow in coming to invest because we are very cautious. Because for the manufacturing, you need long-term commitment. We need to train the human resources. We need to work with the layout of supporting industry. That's why it takes time for us to come. But we will stay there. Once we decide to go there, and then we try to provide technical training, technology transfer, partner support, etc. And then I think many Japanese companies are pretty good with kind of that compliance. So I hope together with those kind of maybe strengths, we hope we can really work with what's strong in UK and then to create a new era of development cooperation. So this is the end of my presentation. And then I have some of the kind of publication or papers and related to this. So if you are interested, please let me know. Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you very much. And we can make sure afterwards that all these different presentation and links are circulated and put on the website, I'm sure, so that people will want to download them. In a minute, we'll turn to the first set of questions and discuss it. But this, for me, I mean, it's sort of an intriguing, insightful, sort of fascinating set of presentations, but also a really rather important set. And I think there's a way to sort of navigate the discussion. We've got about 30 minutes, and I think there's probably much to cover. Really valuable from Mr. Okaniwa to sort of set out this big, bold prospectus for the future of Japanese development cooperation. I mean, we were talking before, and let's remember this is development cooperation by Japan, not just ODA anymore. It's a bigger, more embracing concept and notion, and I think we can explore a little bit of what that means beyond finance. The second point, I think I'm right in understanding that this is very much endorsed by the Cabinet, by the Prime Minister. This is a whole of government endeavour, not just a single agency, and I think that's quite significant in terms of the way that Japan is approaching its development cooperation. But equally, as the way you were describing it, there's very much a prospectus here for partnership. This is in search of collaboration, joint working, not just with those who would conventionally have been seen the recipients, but those who are partners on this side. And no accident that you're here in the UK today. I understand we're in Berlin yesterday. This is very much a collaborative venture. Where's the fit? Where's the complementarity? And from that, the discussion, I think some nice themes emerge. The question of, well, what is distinctive, as Professor King was saying? What do you read into this that's still distinctive, but also where does it fit elsewhere? And some notions here about the nature of agility, the X factor, the Japaneseness, and I think we'll try and explore that a little bit. But then coming to Professor Ono's presentation, well, how does that play out in a marketplace that's sort of competitive? Mm-hmm. There are a lot of actors, and you need to find your niche, and this sort of, you hear this language of comparative advantage coming up again and again in a lot of presentations and debates. So I think we can have a useful discussion about how do you match what you're good at, what you're known for, what you can offer with what the competition is doing and where the demand exists, and linking those three in an offer around future development cooperation, I think is really, really important. Well, we'll come to a first question, but let me sort of suggest, I mean, people, of course, feel free to ask whatever you'd like, but there seem to be a certain number of questions that speak directly to the matter of the new Development Cooperation Charter, what it's about, what it means, what's significant, what's new, what's game-changing. And the second set of issues about how that relates to collaboration, this sort of very clear request for looking at partnerships. We had a lot of examples around partnerships in the private sector, but also where collaboration, where you see the fit, the complementarity, who's doing similar things, who's different for this work. So I'll start with Professor Owa to offer a few remarks. Always, one, she's very kindly prepared a few remarks, but secondly, I think it always gets the conversation going. And we'll try and take a batch of 2 or 3 or 4 questions. If you could just, when you speak, just say who you are and if there's an organisation you represent, and keep questions fairly tight or sharp or remarks.